We don't hire poor men. She said quietly, not as an insult, the way a woman reads a line out of a policy she wrote herself. Curtis Rayfield stood in the boardroom doorway in a suit that had been pressed one too many times, in steel-toed boots with the shine worn off them, holding a briefcase older than her career. Adrienne Halloran, chief executive of Halloran Dynamics, gestured at the empty chair across the table. "Sit down. Someone will walk you out in 5 minutes." Curtis didn't sit. He set a sealed envelope on the table, turned it until the board seal faced her, and spoke for the first time since he'd walked into the building. "I'm not here to be hired. I'm here to take your job." Nobody in that room moved. What Adrienne didn't know was that the signature inside that envelope had already cost her the company. The only question left was whether she'd find out before lunch. If you want to watch a woman lose a chair she thought was welded to the floor, subscribe now and stay to the end, because the way she loses it is not the way anyone in that room expected. 11 hours earlier. The house Curtis Rayfield rented sat at the edge of a town that used to make things and now mostly stored them. At 20 minutes to 6, the kitchen light was the only one on the street. He had the boot upside down on a dish towel, holding the sole against the seam while the glue set. The stitching had let go at the toe a month back. He'd sewn it twice, and the thread had pulled through both times, so this morning it was glue a length of fishing line and the flat end of a butter knife. Steel-toed, size 11, 9 years old. The kind of boot that stops being footwear at some point and starts being a record of where a man has stood. On the counter, 2 envelopes side by side for 11 days. He'd stopped pretending that was an accident. The first was from the hospital, not the hospital itself anymore, but the office it sold its old accounts to. The balance was what remained after the insurance ran out and the house sold. The letter used the words, "Final courtesy notice," and near the bottom, in the same size type as everything else, it said the account would be transferred for collection in 40 days. 40 days. The second envelope was a college application printed off a library computer because the printer at home had died in the spring. Camille had filled in most of it, name, school, essay, a list of clubs that made her sound busier than she was. One field was blank. Household income. She'd left it for him, and he'd left it for later, and later had been sitting there 11 days. He worked nights. Warehouse on the county road shift supervisor, 10 until 6, 4 nights a week. He'd taken that schedule on purpose. It meant that when Camille came out the door at 7:15 with her hair still wet, there was a truck in the driveway with the heater already running. He'd applied to 22 places in 3 years. He'd made it to a final round 9 times. 9 times somebody had shaken his hand, told him the panel loved him, and then stopped answering the phone. He had never once been told why. He'd stopped asking. Camille came down the hall in her jacket, thumbing at her phone, and stopped in the doorway when she saw the suit hanging on the back of the chair. "You nervous?" She asked it without looking up, which was how she asked everything that mattered. "No." He set the boot down and checked the knot of his tie in the black glass of the microwave, then pulled it out and did it again. "I'm not going there to be liked." He got the knot even on the second try. "I'm going there to be heard." She made a small sound that might have been agreement. In the truck at the light 2 blocks from the school, she said what she always said. "Here's fine." He pulled over at the corner. He didn't ask why she never wanted the drop-off at the front steps like the other kids. He'd figured that out somewhere around Thanksgiving, and he'd decided that some things you let a 16-year-old keep. She got out. He watched her walk the last block, and then he drove downtown in a suit and a pair of glued boots. His phone buzzed at a red light. An encrypted message from a woman named Rosalind Pryor, independent chair of the Halloran Dynamics board. Executive floor. Do not tell the receptionist why you're here. Do not tell anyone. Halloran Dynamics kept its headquarters in a glass building with a lobby the size of a church, designed to tell you something about the people upstairs before you ever met them. The receptionist looked up when Curtis came through the revolving door. Her eyes went to his boots, then to the briefcase cracked at both corners, the leather gone soft as cloth. She didn't ask his name. She didn't ask who he was there to see. She simply lifted one hand and pointed without a word toward the corridor that led to the service entrance and the freight elevators. Curtis said, "Thank you." Then he turned and walked the other way toward the visitor desk, and if she watched him go, he didn't turn around to check. While he waited for his badge, he stood in front of the glass display case along the east wall. Awards mostly, photographs of ribbon cuttings, and near the bottom shelf in a plain frame that hadn't been dusted in a while, a group shot of about 40 people in front of a plant gate. The plate underneath said, "Ridgemont and a year." The photo had been cropped. Along the right edge, someone was cut in half, one shoulder, one arm, half a face, the eye, and nothing else. Curtis looked at it for about 3 seconds. Then he took his badge and walked to the elevators. On the way, the corridor ran past the glass wall of the test bay, where a small assembly rig ran a demonstration loop for visiting clients. Curtis stopped. There was a knock in it. Not loud, once per revolution, a beat landing a fraction early, the way a bearing sounds when it has started to go out of round and nobody has noticed yet. He stood there long enough that a man in a lanyard glanced at him. Then he walked on and got in the elevator, and he didn't say anything to anyone about it. The 22nd floor smelled like carpet glue and good coffee. Through the glass wall of the main conference room, Curtis could see 9 people already seated, water glasses filled with folders squared to the edge of the table. He got 4 steps before Adrienne Halloran came around the corner and put herself in the doorway. She was not what the stories about her led you to expect. She was pleasant. That was the first thing, and it was the thing that made everything else work. Mr. Rayfield. She said his name correctly, which nobody in that building had done yet. "You came in from the county road, didn't you? That's what 40 minutes this time morning." She tilted her head slightly. "You'd have left the house before 6. He said it was about that. She nodded like they'd agreed on something. Then she looked at him properly, the suit, the briefcase, the boots, and she took her time about it, and there was nothing cruel on her face at all, which was somehow worse. "I want to say this plainly, so nobody wastes anybody's morning." She folded her hands. "We don't hire poor men." She let that sit for exactly 1 second. Then she pulled out the chair beside her and turned it toward him, courteous as a maitre d'. "Sit down. Someone will walk you out in 5 minutes." Behind her, Spencer Nash, the chief financial officer, was scrolling something on his phone. He didn't look up. "It's not personal, it's optics." He kept scrolling. "Lenders read a room before they read a balance sheet. That's just the business." Nobody laughed. That was the part that surprised Curtis. In 8 years, he'd built a whole theory about what a room like this would sound like, and it turned out the truth was quieter and more organized than anything he'd imagined. He walked to the table and set the briefcase down. He opened it, took out a sealed envelope, and slid it across the polished wood until the board seal was facing her right side up. "I'm not here to be hired." He straightened, and he did not sit in the chair she had offered. "I'm here to take your job." For a moment, Adrienne's expression didn't change at all. Then she looked past him at the 2 security officers by the elevator bank and lifted 2 fingers off the table, not a gesture of anger, a gesture of scheduling. The guards got 4 steps. "Stay where you are." Rosalind Pryor came in through the far door with a folder under her arm and reading glasses pushed up into her hair. She was 71 years old and had sat on the board for 19 of them, and she had the specific, unhurried quality of a person who has never once needed to raise her voice to end a conversation. She set the folder down on the table. "Let me correct something before anyone in this room embarrasses themselves further." She looked at Adrienne when she said it, but she said it to everyone. "We are not hiring a chief executive." She put one hand flat on the folder. "We're hiring the one man in this file who already told the truth once and paid for it." Then she laid it out in the flat voice of a woman reading a weather report, which made it land harder than any speech would have. The bank was coming. The lender holding the company's revolving credit had scheduled a covenant review, and it would begin in 9 days. If the numbers the company had filed did not survive contact with the numbers the company actually had, 11,000 paychecks would end up on a table in a room where nobody who worked here got a seat. The board had opened a confidential search 4 weeks ago and run it without the sitting chief executive's knowledge because a sitting chief executive does not get to choose the person who might replace her. The envelope in front of you, Rosalind said, is a board authorization. 48 hours of full operational access. Every plant, every ledger, every system. Adrienne's voice was still perfectly level. And nobody thought to tell me. No, Rosalind said. Nobody did. Then she turned to Curtis, and here she added the part that changed the shape of the whole thing. One condition, Mr. Rayfield, and I want witnesses to it. She took the glasses out of her hair and set them on the folder. If your recommendation includes mass layoffs, I will vote against you myself. I don't care how right your arithmetic is. Anyone can save a company by emptying it. She sat down. 48 hours, starting now. What followed was not an evaluation. It was a trial run by lawyers in a room with good chairs. Warren Dolan, chief legal counsel, opened a folder and read out the contents of an 8-year-old personnel file. Termination for cause. Unauthorized disclosure of confidential documentation. Damage to plant equipment at the Ridgemont facility. Unsubstantiated allegations of financial misconduct against senior leadership. He read it the way a man reads a grocery list, and that was deliberate too. Then he closed the folder and set his palm on top of it. This company runs on procedure, Mr. Rayfield. He said it almost kindly. I'd know. I wrote most of it. Curtis didn't argue. He reached down, unlatched the briefcase, and lifted the lid. Tucked into the pocket inside the flap held there by an elastic strap gone slack with age was a folded hospital statement. It came halfway out with the lid. For about a second it was visible to everyone at that end of the table the letterhead, the account number, the amount in the box on the right. Curtis pushed it back down with 2 fingers and took out what he'd come for. A laminated plant badge, faded with his own face on it 8 years younger, and a single photocopied page from a shift log dated, initialed in the margin, in his handwriting. He set both in the center of the table, pushed them toward the board, and sat down without a word. They read. It took less than a minute. Dolan picked up the badge, turned it over, and set it down again. This establishes that you worked there. He aligned it neatly with the edge of the folder. It doesn't establish that you warned anyone about anything. Those are very different claims, and only one of them is in dispute. Curtis said nothing because there was nothing to say. Dolan was right. 8 years he'd carried the story, and the story had no proof attached to it. He'd sent those emails from a company account on a company machine, and when he walked out of Ridgemont, he'd walked out clean the way you do when you still believe a record is a record. Adrienne let the silence work a moment. Then she leaned forward, and her voice was gentle, and that was the most dangerous thing that happened in that room all morning. A night shift and a 16-year-old at home. I'd want what you want. She let it sit. I'm just not sure this building is where you get it. At the back of the room, Diane Kessler, head of human resources, tightened her grip on a stack of files until her knuckles went pale. She didn't speak. 19 years in this company had taught her exactly how much silence costs and exactly how long you can keep paying it. Nobody looked at her. 48 hours to prove it. 40 days before a hospital stopped sending letters and started sending someone else. The meeting broke at 9:10, and by 9:20, the machine had started moving. Spencer Nash told his deputy to assemble a clean operating pack for Brayton current figures standard format, nothing that would require a footnote. He used the word clean twice and did not appear to notice. Warren Dolan opened a new matter file and titled it with Curtis's name, not because anything had happened yet, but because in his experience, something always did. And Adrienne Halloran closed her door and made a phone call. She kept her voice low, which was unusual for her, because she had never in her life said anything she was afraid of being overheard saying. No, nothing's changed on the pledge. She turned her chair toward the window. They're still buying. Quietly, but they're buying. Then near the end, a sentence that meant nothing to anyone listening, and everything 8 days later. The family votes are already handled. They've been handled for 2 years. The plant sat 90 minutes north, 400,000 square feet of it, and it generated more of the company's unexplained losses than the next 3 sites combined. Starting there was Adrienne's suggestion. She made it graciously in front of the board and framed it as giving him the hardest thing first. There was no camera crew. There was no stunt. There was a schedule waiting for him when he arrived, 11 meetings back-to-back, ending at 6 entirely defensible and designed so that a man with 48 hours would spend 18 of them in conference rooms. Curtis read it, thanked the coordinator, and went out onto the floor instead. He walked the main line from the in-feed to the packing cells, stopping at each station long enough to watch a full cycle, and asked 3 questions all morning. 2 of them were about torque settings. At the second cell, he crouched down beside a conveyor to look underneath at the drive chain. An older man on the opposite station glanced over. His eyes went down to Curtis's feet and stayed there a second longer than a glance. Worn steel toe, cap showing through at the crease. And along the seam at the front, a line of fishing line, hand-sewn, doubled back on itself. The man turned to the woman working beside him and said something short into her ear. She looked. Then she looked at Curtis differently. By 11 o'clock, everyone on that floor knew that the man from headquarters had stood on a line before. Nobody announced it. It moved the way things move in a plant sideways at Brayton in the parking lot, and it was the only reason a single person on that floor told him anything true that week. His title got him through the door. The boots got him the rest. Loretta Pike had been at Brayton for 22 years and ran the second shift on the main line. She was 58, built like someone who had lifted things for a living, and she did not stand up when he introduced himself. He asked her what she'd fix first if somebody handed her the money. She wiped her hands on a rag slowly and didn't look at him. Every few years, somebody in a good coat walks this floor and asks us what's wrong. She folded the rag and put it in her back pocket. Then they go upstairs, and 4 months later, we're down another 12 people, and the ones who are left do the same work for the same money. She finally met his eyes. So no, I've got nothing for you. She went back to her line. By early afternoon, Curtis had a theory, and it was wrong. The parts inventory at Brayton didn't reconcile. Components were leaving the cage and not arriving at the cells, and the variance was concentrated in high-value assemblies, drive units, controllers, the things that walk. So he did what a warehouse supervisor does. He asked for the security footage. He got it because his authorization said he got it, and he sat in a windowless office off the loading dock and started at the beginning. 11 hours of it, 2 cameras watched at 4 times speed and dropped to normal every time a pallet jack crossed the frame. By 10 that night, he had watched an entire shift come in work and go home. Nobody stole anything. Nobody had stolen anything in weeks. He sat back in a plastic chair in a room that smelled like burnt coffee and understood that he had just spent a fifth of his 48 hours proving that a thing which had not happened had not happened. Word of it was in the building before he got to his truck. The next morning at the board's 10 o'clock status call, Adrienne raised it herself. She didn't editorialize. She didn't need to. He requested 11 hours of security footage from the Brayton cage. She said it in the voice of a woman reading a delivery schedule. He found nothing. I'm not criticizing him. A new set of eyes is going to check the obvious things first, and it's right that he did. She turned a page. I'm only noting where the clock went. Rosalind Pryor said nothing at all. That was the part that should have worried him. It certainly worried the 4 board members who'd been leaning his way the day before. He didn't drive home that night either. At 1:30 in the morning, with the plant down to a skeleton crew, Curtis walked the main line again in the dark, and this time he wasn't looking. He was listening. And near the back of the building, in the annex that fed the secondary line, he heard it. A knock. Once per revolution, landing a fraction early. The same sound he'd heard through the glass of a test bay in a lobby 90 minutes south 3 days before. He had heard it and walked on because it wasn't his building and it wasn't his week. Now it was both. He followed it to a drive housing and found nothing wrong with the drive. What was wrong was everything around it. An assembly opened, worked on, and closed up with two different generations of fastener, which is what happens when somebody repairs one machine with parts scavenged off another. He went to the scrap bin at the end of the aisle and was in there 20 minutes up to his elbows. What he came out with was a controller module gutted, the housing cracked. Taped to the side of it was a parts requisition, requested, approved by the plant, and then 3 days later canceled a signature, a date, and in the box marked reason, nothing at all. Curtis stood in the aisle at 2 in the morning holding a dead controller and a canceled work order, and he finally understood what he was actually looking at. He pulled 12 months of maintenance logs and read them in the break room until the sun came up. The pattern was on every page once you knew what it was. Requests submitted, requests withdrawn, not resolved, withdrawn by the requester days later, over and over, going back almost a year. Nobody was fixing anything, and nobody was refusing to fix anything either, because a refusal creates a record. He didn't tell the plant manager. He didn't call the board. He found Loretta Pike at the end of her shift and asked her one question. How long has the number 4 line been down? She looked at him for a long moment. 4 months and 9 days. At 10 the next morning, there were 31 people on the mezzanine, plant management, 2 regional directors, and everyone who could find a reason to be standing on a catwalk. Curtis had asked for a walkthrough of the number 4 line, and the plant manager had agreed to it in writing, which was itself a small miracle. They got as far as the control station, and the shift manager began explaining the current run rate, and that was when Loretta Pike came up the stairs and stood at the rail. Start it. He said something about a scheduled maintenance window. She didn't move. The report says that line ran at 91% last month. She said it to the room, not to him. So start it. Let him watch it run. He told her that wasn't her call to make. I've been asking for 4 months and 9 days. She looked down the length of the floor at 40 people who had all stopped working. This is the first time there's been anybody in the building who might actually listen, so I'm asking now in front of everybody because that's the only way it counts. Then she walked to the panel, put her hand on the master switch, and looked at the plant manager one more time. He didn't stop her. She pulled it down. Nothing happened. No motor, no hum in the floor, no warning tone, just the sound of air moving through the ductwork over their heads, and 31 people on a catwalk listening to it. The controller had been pulled out of the number 4 line 11 weeks earlier to keep number 2 running through a rush order. It was never replaced because the requisition to replace it had been canceled because approving it would have created a document establishing exactly how long the line had been dead. Curtis had the last 2 quarters of production approvals brought up on the mezzanine monitor. At the bottom of the page, under the certification language, was an electronic signature. A. Halloran. She was on the video link from headquarters, and she began calmly to explain that plant-level figures were compiled by regional operations and that certification was a formality performed on the site's representation. Curtis didn't argue. He reached over, took the page off the desk, and turned it around so it faced the camera. She stopped talking. On the way out, Loretta Pike walked him as far as the parking lot door. She didn't hand him anything. She had a family and a mortgage and 22 years in a company that had just watched her pull a switch in front of 31 people. There's a plant archive, site correspondence going back. She looked out at the lot. Search the number 4 line by asset tag, not by name, 4 months back. Then she went home. He found it himself in 20 minutes from a terminal in an empty office. A chain of 11 emails from floor staff escalating, dated 4 months and 9 days ago, describing the exact failure he had just proven. And at the end of the chain, a reply from the executive floor. 2 sentences. The second one asked that the matter not be circulated further while options were being evaluated. On his way out, he stopped at pallet row C, crouched down, and took a photograph on his phone of a lot number stenciled on the side of a shrink-wrapped skid. He didn't know yet what he'd need it for. He took it anyway. The corridor between the executive elevators and the boardroom was called the Hall of Achievement by the people who named it, and nothing at all by everyone else. Curtis walked it the next morning and stopped in front of a framed citation. Industry Leadership Award 6 years old for a turnaround framework credited to Adrienne Halloran, and on the plaque beneath the glass, a summary of its 5 stages. He read them. He had written them at a folding table in a plant office at Ridgemont, longhand, over about 9 weeks. He'd privately called it the recovery model because he'd never been much good at naming things. The wording had been cleaned up. Stages 3 and 4 had been swapped. Everything else was his. He stood there a moment. Then he walked on to the elevator because he had 31 hours left and 11,000 people who had never heard of him, and a plaque on a wall was not going to feed any of them. He never mentioned it to the board. Not once that whole week. By 4 o'clock, the board had heard the Brayton findings, seen the canceled requisition, read the email chain, and watched a recording of 31 people listening to an empty line. Something shifted in that room, and it shifted fast. Rosalind Pryor caught him in the corridor afterward, glasses in her hand. "You have the votes." She said it the way she said everything, without a flicker. "Don't do anything clever between now and Thursday, and you'll have them Thursday." And then Roland Halloran, who had founded the company in 1979 with a leased building and 11 employees, and who had spent the last 3 days regarding Curtis as a man circling something wounded, came down the corridor and put out his hand. Curtis shook it. In the stairwell, because he didn't want to make the call from the floor, he rang his daughter and told her he might be home for dinner. She said, "Like actual dinner? Or the thing where you say dinner and get home at 11? He laughed the first time all week and told her actual dinner. He got 19 minutes. He'd gone back to a workstation on 22 to pull document metadata off the legacy server, tedious, uninteresting work of exactly the kind that turns up things nobody meant to leave lying around. Edit histories, account stamps, messages buried in document properties. He had a folder open and he was reading it, and his screen went white and then to a login prompt. Account suspended. Warren Dolan came through the door 40 seconds later with 2 security officers behind him, which meant he had not walked from his office. He had been waiting somewhere closer. "Step away from the terminal, please." He was perfectly polite about it. Downstairs in the same conference room where the week had started, Dolan laid it out for whoever was still in the building, archived material accessed outside the scope of his authorization, protected intellectual property copied plant employees contacted without clearance. "We now have more than sufficient grounds," he said, closing the folder, "to bar him from this building permanently." Adrienne asked that the review be terminated immediately. She asked it the way you'd ask for the check. Dolan had taken his credentials. The board had never taken his 48 hours. 19 of them were left. Curtis intended to spend every one. Rosalind Pryor did not argue with Warren Dolan. 11 years of knowing him had taught her that arguing never worked. She called the technology group herself and asked for an independent access log, not a summary. The raw log sent to the board's oversight server rather than to legal. It arrived in 8 minutes, 2 pages. Page 1 showed the credential suspension initiated at 4:41 p.m. from Dolan's account. Page 2 showed something else. At 4:44 p.m., 3 minutes after locking Curtis out, the same account had issued a deletion order against an entire archive directory. Not a quarantine, not a hold, a permanent purge scheduled to execute overnight. Dolan began to explain that a purge of an unsecured legacy directory was routine data hygiene under the retention schedule and that he could produce the schedule. That was when Curtis spoke for the first time since the guards had walked him downstairs. "I never downloaded anything." He hadn't sat down. He was standing at the end of the table with his hands at his sides. Not to a laptop, not to a drive, not to an email. "The second I found that folder, I filed a preservation request with the board's oversight server." He looked at Rosalind, not at Dolan. "It's time-stamped. Check it against page 2. The preservation request had been logged at 4:33 p.m., 8 minutes before the lockout. 11 minutes before the deletion order, which meant that Warren Dolan, chief legal counsel, had ordered the destruction of material that was already under a formal preservation hold and had done it in writing on a company system with his own credentials. He did not say anything. He looked at the log, and he closed his folder, and he sat back in his chair. Adrienne turned toward him. "Warren, I wanted on the record that I knew nothing about any deletion order." He didn't answer her. He never answered her again. Not that day, not on Thursday, not once in the 11 weeks of the investigation that followed. Some men, when it comes apart, start talking. Warren Dolan simply stopped and stayed stopped, and it was somehow the most frightening thing in the building. He found her by the elevators 20 minutes later. He didn't threaten her. He asked how her review period was going and mentioned pleasantly in passing that confidentiality obligations under her employment agreement survived termination and that it was easy to forget that in an emotional week. "I'd hate for you to say something now that costs you something later." Then the elevator came and he got in it and he wished her a good evening. Diane Kessler had been demoted 14 months earlier and was working a review period with a daughter and a mortgage. The man who had instructed her to alter a personnel file 8 years ago was not, as of this quarter, one of the 2 signatures on her compensation. She went back to her office, picked up the phone, and called Rosalind Pryor. The first thing she said before anything else was that she wanted to discuss the terms of her separation. The lockout had one practical effect Curtis couldn't get around. He could not run a single query on the inventory system. So he called Loretta Pike from the parking garage and asked her a question about pallets. She listened, said she'd think about it, and hung up. She thought about it for 4 hours. Then she called a man she'd worked with for 6 years before he transferred to the Eastern Distribution Center, asked him for a favor and didn't tell him why. The photograph came through at 6:20 the next morning. A shrink-wrapped skid in a warehouse 2,000 miles from Brayton Works. Same stenciled lot number, same pallet. Photographed 9 days apart. On Wednesday afternoon, Adrienne Halloran's assistant placed a call to a logistics company on a county road 90 minutes north on behalf of the office of the chief executive to verify the current employment status of an individual under consideration for a senior operational role. It was a normal call, the kind made 100 times a day in this country. The assistant was courteous, gave no negative information, made no accusation, and asked for nothing but confirmation of dates. That evening, Curtis got a call in the parking garage from his own operations manager, apologetic vague, using the word restructuring 3 times. His hours were going from 4 nights a week to 1, effective Monday. Nobody told him why. Nobody had ever told him why. Not once in 9 final rounds and 3 years. Wednesday night, 9:15, and the executive floor was empty except for one office with the light on. Adrienne didn't ask him to sit this time. She just slid a folder across the desk and let him open it himself. It was a contract, a real one, drafted properly, already signed on her side. Regional Director of Operations, 4 sites, a number in the compensation box larger than everything he'd earned in 3 years put together. Medical coverage effective the first of the month, no waiting period. On page 3, the dependent tuition program, 80% at any accredited 4-year school. And on page 4, a signing payment, 1 figure. He looked at it for a while because he recognized it. It was within about $200 the balance on a hospital statement folded into the flap of a briefcase. She had gone and found the number. Somebody had pulled it, and she had put it in a contract, and she had not said one word about it. The only thing on the last page was a confidentiality undertaking, standard length, standard language. It said that he would not discuss the findings of his review with any person, agency, or publication. It's not a bribe, and I'd rather you didn't insult us both by calling it one. She capped her pen and set it down where he could reach it. It's a job. It's a good one. You'd be excellent at it, and I would sleep better knowing you had those 4 sites. He asked her why she was doing it, and she told him. That was the thing he had not expected, and it was worse than any threat she could have made. 2 years ago, a fund had started buying the stock, quietly in blocks under 3 names. Their plan was to take the company apart, sell the distribution arm, sell the Eastern Sites license, the name, and leave a shell with 11,000 people attached to it. To block them, she'd needed to consolidate the family holding, and to do that fast, she'd pledged the shares her own and a portion of her father's against a personal facility with a covenant tied to the company's reported position. If the real numbers surfaced, the facility defaulted. If it defaulted, the bank took the shares. And there was exactly one buyer standing in the market with the appetite for them. You think you're saving them from me? She pushed the folder an inch further across the desk and did not take her hand off it. I'm the only reason there's anything left to save, and the thing Curtis could not get past sitting in that chair at 9:40 at night was that a substantial part of it was true. He picked up the pen. He put it down on the signature line on page 6 and wrote C-U-R-T, and it was still moving when his phone buzzed against the arm of the chair. A message from his daughter. He stopped. 38 days until the hospital, and a contract on a desk with half a name on it. The message had said, "Did you eat?" That was all. 3 words, no punctuation, sent at 9:41 on a Wednesday night by a 16-year-old who had noticed there was nothing gone from the refrigerator. He'd put the pen down, closed the folder, and taken it home with him because he hadn't known what else to do with it. At 5:30 the next morning, Camille came into the kitchen for water and stopped. The folder was open on the table where he'd left it when he finally went to bed. The contract lay face up. She read enough of the first page to understand what it was, and enough of the fourth to understand what it was worth. And underneath it, half out from beneath the corner, was the hospital statement. Same box, same number on the right-hand side. She stood there in the dark for a long time, longer than a person needs to stand anywhere. Her father had gotten 4 letters in his own handwriting onto the signature line and then stopped. She didn't wake him. She didn't say anything about it at 7:15 in the truck, and he dropped her at the corner 2 blocks from school, the same as always. But she looked back this time before she went. He put the folder on Adrienne's desk at 9, unfinished with the hospital statement still tucked underneath it where she would find it. She looked at the 4 letters on the signature line and then up at him. You didn't offer me a job. He hadn't sat down, and he didn't intend to. You offered to buy the only thing I've got left that nobody's already taken. He walked out. She didn't follow him, and she didn't call after him, and she sat in that office for a while with her hand flat on the folder. Rosalind Pryor did not repeat herself. She came into the small conference room where Curtis had set up the travel clock on the table facing him and said the number. 12 hours. A plan that keeps this company running without mass layoffs, or I vote against you and you go home. Then she left, and the 48 hours ended right there, and there was only 1 clock in the building after that. He started with the suppliers because you cannot fix cash without fixing the people you owe. 19 calls between 2 in the afternoon and 8 at night. He got through to 11 people, and 9 said a version of the same thing, that they'd extended terms twice already, that a payment schedule promised in March had never come, and that they had their own payrolls to make. The 10th was a components manufacturer out of Ohio that had stopped shipping in January. The man on the phone had known Curtis at Ridgemont. He listened for 6 minutes without interrupting and then named his condition. There was only one. She doesn't sign anything. Not a contract, not a term sheet, not a change order. A pause on the line. I don't care what her title is on the day. If her name goes on paper, we don't ship. Then Curtis built the plan, and the shape of it was decided by the one instruction Rosalind Pryor had given him on the first morning. He cut from the top. The aircraft. 2 corporate properties carrying maintenance and no revenue. The executive catering contract, the leased vehicle fleet, a golf sponsorship that had appeared on no customer invoice in 6 years. A clawback of 2 cycles of incentive compensation calculated on figures now known to be wrong. Extended terms with 4 suppliers willing to come back. Financial oversight pulled out from under family control and reported straight to the audit committee. And 2 contracts reopened, both canceled the previous year, according to the internal notes after a partner questioned a number on a routine call. Not one hourly position on any factory floor. At 2 in the morning, there was a knock on the doorframe of the spare bedroom he'd turned into an office. Camille was standing there, holding a laptop. It was 15-years-old silver with a crack in the bezel and a sticker on the lid from a swim club she'd quit in 8th grade. It had been his. She'd inherited it when she was 11 and used it until the school gave her a Chromebook, and it had lived in the bottom of her closet ever since. I never wiped it. She set it on the desk and turned it toward him. You used to leave your email open on it. When I was little, I thought that was so boring. It's all still in there. She had opened the sent folder before she came down the hall. 11 emails sent 8 years earlier from a plant office at Ridgemont to 3 recipients in the legal department. Full headers, server timestamps, message IDs, attachments intact, an inspection report, 2 photographs of a weld line, and a 1-page memorandum recommending that certification be withheld pending retest. Not a printout, not a copy, the originals with everything underneath them that makes an email something a lawyer cannot wave away. He didn't say anything for a moment. She was looking at the floor. I'm sorry I told them you worked in an office. He didn't tell her it was all right because it wasn't, and she'd have known. He reached over, hooked the second chair with his foot, and pulled it up to the desk beside him. They worked until 4. Roland Halloran was 81 and hadn't had an office in the building for 6 years. He came in Thursday morning because his daughter asked him to. Curtis showed him 3 things. The first was the original draft of the recovery model longhand on the back of a requisition pad coffee ring on the second page. He set it down and said nothing at all about the plaque in the corridor. The second was a photograph. The uncropped original of the group shot in the lobby display case. 41 people at the Ridgemont plant gate. And on the right-hand end, whole both shoulders in frame, a man 8 years younger, standing where he'd stood for 11 months. Roland Halloran looked at that picture for a long time. He looked at the frame in the case and then at the file on the screen, and he didn't ask any questions about it because there weren't any. The third was the one that did it. At the bottom of the 8-year-old separation authorization, the document that had converted a resignation into a termination for cause was an electronic signature. R. Halloran. He said he had never seen the document in his life. Adrienne was standing by the window. She didn't deny it, and she didn't perform anything. I used your credentials. She kept her eyes on the glass. You'd have signed it. If I'd walked down the hall and asked you, you'd have signed it, and we both know that. That, her father said, is not the same thing. Diane Kessler had gone to Rosalind first, which the board found unsentimental, and which Curtis, when he heard about it, understood completely. She asked for 3 things: a neutral reference indemnity for civil exposure, limited strictly to matters she disclosed truthfully, and 30 days. Rosalind gave her 2 of the 3 and told her plainly which one she wasn't getting. Diane produced the material anyway. The original personnel file, unaltered, downloaded before the change was made, and an email from Warren Dolan, 8 years old, instructing that the stated reason for separation be revised in the system of record with the revised language supplied in the body of the message. She handed the drive to Rosalind, and then she said one thing to Curtis in front of the room, and she didn't look at him while she said it. I'm not asking you to say it's all right. She put her hands back at her sides. I'm just done pretending I didn't type it. Thursday morning, 10 o'clock, and the room was full. Spencer Nash opened with the proxy. He had, he explained, held voting authority over a portion of the family holding for 2 years under a properly executed agreement, and he intended to exercise it. The board's independent counsel had the agreement in front of her and asked him to turn to Clause 9. The proxy took effect on one condition: a written determination that Roland Halloran was incapable of directing his own affairs. Roland Halloran was sitting 4 seats down, entirely lucid, with his reading glasses on. Nash turned on Adrienne inside of 6 seconds. He said he had acted on direct instruction. He said it fast and badly, and then something went out of him, and what came next wasn't a defense at all. It started with one invoice. His hand was flat on the table, and it was not steady. 2 years ago, I moved it into the next quarter to keep a shift open at Brayton through the winter. He stared at the middle distance. That's all it was the first time. Warren Dolan raised procedure. He said the bylaws required a formal cause hearing with notice, and that such a hearing could not be convened inside 3 weeks. Rosalind Pryor turned to the tab she had marked that morning. Article 11, Section 4. Emergency suspension, where the board identifies a credible and immediate threat to solvency. She looked up. Amended 6 years ago, drafted by counsel. Dolan did not respond. He had not responded to anything since Tuesday afternoon, and he did not start now. Then Curtis put 2 photographs on the screen, side by side, 2 shrink-wrapped skids in 2 buildings. The same stenciled lot number on both. 9 days apart. He let them sit there for a few seconds before he said anything. Same lot, same palette. He didn't use a pointer. 2 buildings 2,000 miles apart. He looked at the lender's representative on the conference line. One of them is a photograph of money that doesn't exist. Nobody in the room asked a follow-up question. There wasn't one. And then, when it was finished, when the numbers were done, and the vote was 2 minutes from being called, and there was nothing left that anybody needed proved, Rosalind Pryor opened one more page. "There's a message in the disclosed material," she said. 8 years old. I'm going to read it because I don't think it should go into a file without being said out loud in this room first. She put her glasses on. Make sure he's unemployable across the industry. I don't want him resurfacing. She took the glasses off again. 22 applications, 9 final rounds. 3 years of hands shaken and phones that stopped ringing, and not one person not once telling him why. Nobody in that room said anything for a while. The lender's representative could be heard clearing his throat on the conference line and then not doing it again. The vote took 90 seconds. Adrienne Halloran was suspended as chief executive. Warren Dolan was suspended pending investigation. Spencer Nash was stripped of financial authority. And Curtis Rayfield was appointed interim chief executive of Halloran Dynamics for a term of 90 days. She signed the handover documents at a side table in the lobby at 12:40 because the 22nd floor had already been secured and nobody had thought about where else to do it. 2 people from legal stood with her. Neither spoke. She initialed 4 places signed to and put the pen down on the folder. Then she walked to the elevator with a coat over her arm, past the display case, past the desk. The receptionist didn't look up. The doors closed. Curtis Rayfield was on the 14th floor at the time in a meeting about supplier terms and did not know she had gone until somebody mentioned it an hour later. The number 4 line at Brayton came back up on a Tuesday in April. Loretta Pike was on the panel when it started, and there was nothing to prove that morning and nobody on the catwalk to watch, so she brought it up to speed and went back to work. The office on 22 was repainted in May and given to the Quality Assurance Group, who had spent 11 years in a basement room with no windows. Rosalind Pryor, asked by a board member how the rest of it had settled, gave the whole aftermath in a sentence. Dessler's rebuilding the reporting line she watched them dismantled, and Rollins decided he'd rather listen than talk. Both of them are about 4 years late. Both of them showed up. The covenant review closed without a breach. In July, Curtis came through the revolving doors at 8:10, and there was a man sitting in the chairs by the display case. Mid-50s, a jacket that had been good once and had been asked to keep going a while past that. A folder in his lap held with both hands. At the desk, the same receptionist looked up. Her eyes went down, then toward the corridor that led to the freight elevators, and she began to lift her hand. Curtis stopped walking. He turned to the man in the chairs and asked him his name. The man told him. Curtis said it back to him to make sure he had it. Then he turned to the desk and said it again once slowly, the way you say a name you intend to remember, and told her he'd be in a meeting at 9 and to send the gentleman up before then. Then he went to the elevator. That morning, before any of it, he'd sat at the kitchen table with the boot upside down on a dish towel and run a fresh length of line through the seam at the toe because the glue had let go again on the left one and he hadn't gotten around to buying another pair. It wasn't that he couldn't afford them now. You don't measure a man by what he can afford to wear. You measure him by what he refuses to sell. If this one got to you, leave a comment with the moment that did it. I read them. And if you want the next story, the one about the man who came back for what he was owed, it's waiting for you now.